Hey guys, if this wasn't a cruel and unfair world, I wouldn't be back. But I am back, so suck it up. The Gundam TCG has officially launched, including starter sets packed in with sneak preview minis to the upcoming Gundam Assemble miniatures game. In this video, we're gonna build, customize, and paint up some Zakus, or as the real ones like to call them, the Bourgeonnons. You're watching Apollo Geist. So Bandai has been kind of going hog wild with the TCGs lately. After launching the new Digimon TCG in 2021, Bandai has continued exporting the formula to pretty good success with other IPs, including a One Piece and now Gundam card game. While the Digimon TCG is my favorite TCG and the only one I really play, I was pretty unimpressed with the One Piece TCG in Union Arena. But I was tentatively excited for the Gundam TCG simply because it sounded more interesting. Last month, they released these starter sets, including not just the starter decks themselves, but a trio of minis from Gundam Assemble, launching next year. The idea is you can use these as tokens for the TCG, but I don't know anyone who's actually using them for that purpose. Let me know if you are, I'm actually kind of curious who is. Anyway, I picked up the Zaku set, and full disclosure, I'm in this for the minis. I haven't played the TCG yet, and while I hear it's really good, I'm not jonesing to play it right away either. The unboxing is barely even worth mentioning. It includes decks, the runners, and some booklets. You've opened a box before. The runners themselves I found interesting because they're a lot thicker than the usual runners from Bandai kits. I wonder if this is for shipping reasons. Anyway, let's snip these space fascist robots out of their plastic prison and put them together. I was very excited to crack open these minis and put them together. The first thing I was wondering about was plastic formulation. Plastics used for Gunpla are typically rigid, designed to withstand the strain of a model's weight imposes. By contrast, the styrene plastics used for miniatures such as from Games Workshop tend to be softer, enabling easier cutting and modifying. I was interested to see if Bandai was gonna match this consistency, and I can report with surprise to almost nobody, no, it's the same rigid plastic they always use, dipshit, no duh. For those used to working with Warhammer models, these require just a little bit more force to clip out, which you can go overboard on if you're not careful, just something to note. As for assembly itself, I had a lot of fun. Let's be clear, these are simple, chunky, push-fit models. That doesn't mean that there aren't a few moments I didn't smile at though. On Char's Zaku, his left hand is attached to the rifle. I expected to have to glue the hand on the often precarious way you might with a Space Marine, but instead there is a juncture between the rifle's stock and the armpit. The rifle hand rested right on top of the wrist with virtually no gap. Nice. Everything fits in perfectly and with a satisfying click. Although I used some, you probably don't need glue for these. At no point did I need to whittle down pegs or stuff gaps with putty. Bandai takes full advantage of the fact these are machines, not organic men in suits of armor, so areas of connection that would otherwise compromise a human silhouette instead seamlessly blend into its mechanical fascia. I really liked building these. That being said, they're by no means perfect. First of all, the gates in these models were pretty bad, and because this is your usual rigid Gunpla plastic, it can be easy to accidentally gouge out a little too much. This can be mitigated by not nipping at the base of the gate itself, but I did find myself having to do a fair bit of cleanup more than I would for usual minis like these. Second, because these are push-fit models and distinct poses, they are not exactly kitbash friendly, which is a pity because so much of the fun Gunpla comes from recreating your favorite niche mobile suit variant from a 1998 Hobby Japan magazine issue. They're not impossible, just harder to do. Lastly, while these models are crisply detailed, they are going to have some things that'll bug people. A really good example are the hoses on the Zaku's legs, which to save assembly time have a wall of plastic between them. Not impossible to fix, not a deal breaker, but I would just expect to see a little bit more stuff like this in later releases. These models are going to be cheaper than Warhammer, and it's fair to see that reflected in how they're made. So putting these together and man, I'm fucking hyped for this game, dude. I am still very skeptical Bandai has the sauce to keep it going for more than like a year, but we'll burn that bridge when we get to it. By the way, I want to mention another line of Gundam models you should keep an eye out for. Gundam Artifact is a line of Gundam miniatures Bandai first launched in 2021, and these are damn good alternatives to the Assemble minis. They're way more fiddly, they aren't perfectly in scale, and all of them are just kind of standing. But if you're a sicko like me who wants more options, I'd pick some of them up. Anyway, before we start painting, there are some physical modifications I want to make. For the two standard Zakus, we're going to be adding something called Zimmerit. This was a coating the Germans used during World War II, designed to keep magnetic mines from sticking to tanks and blowing them up. They're a popular feature Gunpla builders like to give conventional grunt suits, so I thought I'd do it here. It took a few attempts for me to be happy with, but what I found worked was to spread green stuff and or milliput over the surface, and then using a ridged cap, roll it in to create that texture. I promise you have one of these lying around, just check tubes of toothpaste or other stuff lying around the house. Also a quick tip if you're trying to remove that plastic wall in the leg hose area. What worked best for me was using a pin vise to drill out a few holes along that wall, connecting the holes with a knife, and then scraping it smooth. It's not the prettiest thing if you look up close, but it's quick and easy. So, for the Commander Zaku, I wanted to modify it to resemble the Psycho Zaku from Gundam Thunderbolt. In that story, the suits are depicted as having these really cool fabric sleeves over the joints and hoses, presumably to keep space dust and debris out. It's also just dope as fuck. I applied green stuff to the areas and initially tried wrapping it around the hoses, but it was a pain in the ass, so eventually I just manually clipped off the hoses and glued on sausages of putty. Then I tried to make them look wrinkled like fabric. This whole process really should have been done before gluing and assembling, but I pulled it off. The last thing I wanted to add before painting was some texture. So I want these Zakus to have that kind of hammered metal look, so I took a page from Lincoln Wright and used some lacquer primer. This is the kind you're supposed to airbrush on, but instead we're applying it with a sponge and stippling it all over to create that texture. You can use modeling putty or modeling paste, but this is a finer texture and we want that at this scale. When you use a sponge, you'll also notice a bit more resistance pulling away as the primer dries. The more you do this, the more peaks you get. But be careful, after a certain point, it'll start tearing chunks of sponge off with it as it continues to dry. Another warning, lacquer paints will fuck you up. Wear a respirator if you're gonna spray it, and maybe wear one even if you're just doing this. Play it safe. I was gonna do a quick sand over when I was done, but honestly, I was so happy with how it looked already, I decided it was just time to move on to painting. I started with the standard Zakus, hand painting the base coat as my airbrush is currently out of commission and I've been too lazy to buy replacement parts. Bandai is releasing their own line of paints made for assemble, and I'll probably try them sometime soon, but in the meantime, we're just eyeballing the color scheme. For these boys, I went with more of a colder green, maybe kind of something you'd see out of like a 90s OVA. I knew I was going to be majorly griming them down, so it helps to offset that with the lighter colors. Fun fact, Kunio Okuwara, the designer of the Zaku, was a fashion suit designer before he got into robots. And you can sort of see that influence in the Zaku's torso area. Once the base coating was done, I wanted to add some waterslide decals before shading, so they wouldn't sit awkwardly on top of the shadows and highlights. I cracked open my decade-old collection of Gundam decals and had everything I needed. Seriously, even if you don't care about Gundam, pick up some of their decal sheets. There's so much cool stuff and you can repurpose tons of it for Warhammer or Trench Crusade or whatever else you like. These are for 1:144 scale kits that are relatively huge compared to these minis, but there's still tons of smaller decals that work just fine for these models. The sheet I used, I must have splashed with water at some point or something because these were just not coming off even after leaving them in the water for 20 minutes. I had to make myself cringe and manually slide them off with my finger to get them to budge, but otherwise once they were off, they went on easy. For the shadows and highlights, I didn't go overboard, mainly just adding them to separate panels or add definition to places like the shoulder shield. The weathering later was going to be doing most of the work. I added some paint chipping to make the decals look a little bit more integrated into the paint job, though I think I should have done this before the shading. I went overboard on some areas, and as a result, the decals are very subtle and hard to see in places, but I kind of guess they would be at this scale anyways. For the Commander Zaku, I just base coated it in a Tamiya rattle can I had lying around from an actual Gunpla build, and I thought it was kind of kismet to use it here. The Psycho Zaku design is not identical to this miniature and has different surface detailing, so most of the work here was just applying the colors analogously. I wanted a deeper, almost wine red, so it took me a minute to get what I wanted, and I think this was a mistake, more on that later. For the decals, I actually had some Thunderbolt ones ready, so I used the Living Dead Division logo. Otherwise, all the steps here are the same, just with more colors on things like the hoses and stripes on the skirts and legs. After the base coats, I went for the step I knew would make or break these boys, oil weathering. I've basically all but stopped doing the traditional oil wash method that is used nowadays by painters. Instead, I lay down blots of oil on the mini and with a thinner soaked brush, streak it down. I do this for two reasons. First, from my experience, the solvents have a tendency to permanently weaken the base layers of paint. If I drench the mini in the thinner, it almost always causes the base layers to come off during the cleanup process, even if I add a protective coat or let the oils fully dry. This method, I find, seems to mitigate that effect since I'm not soaking the mini in solvents. Second, this method gives me a little bit more control. If I want the oils to be more of a streaking look than a wash, I can just adjust the amount of solvent on the brush. It also lets me mix different colors on the mini itself as I go. I don't know, I just like it more. In my opinion, this is where the texturing earlier on shines. It creates tiny peaks and valleys where the paints get caught and settle, exaggerating the look. I didn't go for a huge variety of colors, mostly just blacks, browns, and dark reds with occasional purples. I think this worked really well on the standard Zakus due to their light colors, but I think I should have tried to make the Commander Zaku shade of red a bit brighter. I was so focused on getting that shade of red, I forgot that meant the staining would be less visible. Also, because this is a red mobile suit, most of the oils aren't going to show up as well because they're also trending towards that color. I think it still looks good, I just think it could have looked better. After locking the oils in with a quick varnish, I did the final steps. Eagle-eyed viewers have noticed I still haven't painted the Zaku's Heat Hawk nor their motto eyes. I wanted to save these for last because I wanted to do a bit of a glowing effect and didn't want the oil staining to disrupt that. For the eyes, I added a pinkish glow using one of my go-to paints for OSL, Vallejo Fluorescent Red. This paint is already so thin and transparent, it barely needs any thinning to be used as a glaze. I built it up in layers, having the effect radiate out from the head and splashing onto elements like the shoulders. It looks great on the standard Zakus, but once again, the Zaku Commander kinda had me hemming and hawing. There was something about this specific color I didn't like on that shade of red, so I ended up going for more of a true pink instead before I was content. For the Heat Hawk, I added a white undercoat and then base coated in yellow. Then I added layers of orange, radiating away from the base of the axe head. I pushed it very slightly towards a scarlet at the end. I imagined this hawk having like spattered blobs of molten metal from its victims clinging to the blade edge, so I painted on some of those. I also glazed on some orange glowing effects around the axe, but I tried not to go overboard on that as I want the glowing eye to sort of be the star here. I painted these bases black, which was like the absolute bare minimum since I plan on ripping these off the bases anyway when the game proper comes out. But other than that, I think it's time to deploy these units to the money shots. These were some of the most fun minis I've painted in a long time. I'm still kind of in disbelief we're getting a modern Gundam miniatures game. Like, holy shit, we're doing this. Based on what we've seen, it's not 100% what I'd have asked for, and there's no real guarantee it won't be dead in a year, but I'm just glad it's even happening. I'm really excited for the potential fan-made stuff we could get too, like printable models and terrain and fuck. Now I have to start printing up 6mm buildings so we have some ready when the game comes out in 2026. I do want to paint more of these models, but I'm gonna be real guys, these sets are dummy marked up right now, so it's probably gonna be a minute. What do you guys think about these minis? Do you like them? Do you hate them? Do you think a blonde guy with mommy issues should throw an asteroid on me? Let me know in the comments. Peace.